German Shepherd was guarding an empty stroller in the middle of the road. What baby did next left everyone in tears. The story you are about to listen will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the connection between children and animals. What happens when a lost child and a mysterious dog share a secret that no adult can understand? If you enjoy this heart-wrenching tale, please like, share, and let us know where you're listening from. Rain pounded against Lucy Morgan's windshield as she drove through the winding roads of Pine Creek. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, and she squinted through the blurry glass. Her shift at the hospital had been brutal. 12 hours of emergencies, one right after another. All she wanted was to get home, pour a glass of wine, and sink into her couch. A flash of movement caught her eye, something in the middle of the road. Lucy slammed on her brakes, the car skidding slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a halt just feet away from what appeared to be a baby stroller. "What on earth?" she whispered, heartbeat thundering in her chest. The stroller sat abandoned in the middle of the road, rocking slightly in the wind. But what made Lucy's blood run cold wasn't the empty stroller. It was the German Shepherd circling it, hackles raised, teeth bared whenever the wind pushed the stroller even an inch. Lucy's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. The dog's eyes locked with hers through the windshield, intelligent, almost human-like in their intensity. It wasn't aggression she saw there. It was protection. 911, what's your emergency? "I need help," Lucy said, her voice shaking. "There's an empty baby stroller in the middle of Pinewood Drive, near the entrance to Hollow Creek Forest. And there's a German Shepherd guarding it. I don't see a baby anywhere." "Ma'am, did you check if there's a baby in the stroller?" Lucy swallowed hard. "No, I can't get near it. The dog won't let anyone approach, but something's wrong. I just know it." She watched as the rain soaked the dog's fur, yet it remained steadfast, circling the stroller, occasionally looking toward the dark line of trees that marked the edge of Hollow Creek Forest. "We'll send a unit right away. Please stay in your vehicle, ma'am." Lucy hung up, but couldn't take her eyes off the scene. Lightning flashed, illuminating the road for a brief second. The stroller was expensive looking, with plush padding and a rain cover that had partially blown off. The dog's coat was muddy, but beneath the dirt, Lucy could see it was well groomed, not a stray. "Where's your family?" she whispered. As if hearing her, the dog's ears perked up, and it let out a series of urgent barks, not at her, but at the forest. The minutes crawled by as Lucy waited for help to arrive. She drummed her fingers against the steering wheel, debating whether to try approaching the stroller again. Just as she was reaching for her door handle, police lights flashed in her rearview mirror. 2 officers rushed out, rain slicking off their yellow ponchos. The German Shepherd's barking intensified, but it didn't attack. Instead, it ran a few steps toward the forest line, then back to the stroller, as if trying to communicate something. "Ma'am, please stay in your car," one officer called out, as Lucy rolled down her window. "Animal control is on the way." "There might be a baby," Lucy called back, her medical training making her anxious about precious minutes ticking by. The male officer approached slowly, hands out in a non-threatening gesture. The dog growled but didn't lunge. "Easy, boy," the officer said. "We're here to help." Just as he got within 10 feet of the stroller, the German Shepherd went wild, not with aggression, but with excitement. It ran full speed toward the tree line, then stopped, barking frantically before running back to the stroller. The officers exchanged confused glances. Lucy got out of her car, ignoring their warnings. The rain soaked through her scrubs immediately. "I think he wants us to follow him," she said. "Ma'am, please get back in your—" A sound cut through the rain and barking. Faint at first, then more distinct, a child's voice. "Max! Max, I'm here!" 3 sets of eyes turned toward the forest edge, where a small figure emerged from between the trees. A boy, no older than 5, drenched to the bone, his pajama bottoms caked with mud, his feet bare and scratched. His blonde hair was plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were clear and focused on the German Shepherd. The dog, Max apparently, bounded toward the child, all earlier aggression gone, replaced with what could only be described as relief. "Oh my God," Lucy whispered as the officers rushed toward the boy. "Where did he come from?" The child wrapped his small arms around the dog's wet neck, burying his face in the fur. "He helped me," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Max helped me find my way back." 3 miles away at Sunnyside Preschool and Daycare, chaos had erupted. Teachers ran from room to room, checking closets, bathrooms, and storage areas. Parents who had arrived for pickup gathered in the lobby, whispering amongst themselves as police officers took statements and descriptions. Sarah Jensen, the lead teacher for the Cardinals room, couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face as she spoke to Detective Reynolds. "One minute he was there, during quiet time, coloring in the reading corner," she said, her voice breaking. "I turned to help Maddie with her shoelaces, and when I looked back, Noah was gone. It couldn't have been more than 45 seconds. Detective Reynolds kept his voice calm, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "And all the doors were locked?" "Yes," Sarah nodded vigorously. "We have electronic locks on all exterior doors. Parents need a code to enter, and the children can't reach the exit buttons without an adult lifting them." "Security footage?" The director, Ms. Winters, stepped forward, her usual composed demeanor fractured by worry. "Already checking, but our system has been glitchy this week. The company was supposed to come fix it tomorrow." "Noah's parents?" "On their way," Ms. Winters confirmed. "They both work across town. His mother is an architect, his father is in IT." As if on cue, the front doors burst open. A woman with dark curly hair rushed in, her eyes wild with panic, followed closely by a tall man whose face had gone completely pale. "Where is he?" the woman demanded, her voice echoing through the lobby. "Where's my baby?" Detective Reynolds approached the couple, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'm Detective Reynolds. We're doing everything we can to find Noah." Rachel Hayes clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. How does a 4-year-old just disappear from a locked daycare facility? "He's 5, David Hayes corrected automatically, his voice hollow. "He turned 5 last month." The detective nodded, making a note. "Right, 5 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, approximately 3.7, wearing dinosaur print pajamas for nap time. Is that correct?" Rachel nodded frantically. "He has a small birthmark on his right wrist, like a tiny heart. Please, you have to find him. It's going to storm badly. The weather alert said—" Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Mrs. Hayes," Detective Reynolds said gently, "was there anyone unusual who might have shown interest in Noah recently? Anyone who shouldn't have the door code?" David's head snapped up. "Are you suggesting someone took him?" Before the detective could answer, his radio crackled. He stepped away to answer it, and the Hayes watched his expression shift from concern to confusion. "Say again?" "A child found where?" He listened intently, then turned to the anxious parents. "They found a boy matching Noah's description about 3 miles from here, near Hollow Creek Forest. He's with a German shepherd that was guarding a baby stroller in the middle of the road." Rachel gasped. "We don't have a dog, or a stroller anymore. Noah hasn't needed one in years." Detective Reynolds was already moving toward the door. "We should go, now." As they rushed outside, the skies opened up completely. Thunder cracked overhead as they piled into the detective's car and sped away from Sunnyside. "Noah has always been different," David said quietly from the back seat. "He sees things other kids don't." Rachel shot him a warning look, but the detective caught her expression in the rearview mirror. "Different how?" he asked. David hesitated, then sighed. This morning, before daycare, he told Rachel he heard someone calling him from under the trees, said it was important. "We thought he was just playing pretend." "David, please," Rachel whispered. "Not now." But Detective Reynolds' grip tightened on the steering wheel. What exactly did he say about this voice? David closed his eyes, remembering. He said, "Someone small needs help, Daddy. They can't find their way home. They've been lost for a very, very long time." As lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the road ahead, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "Oh God," she whispered. "What if he wasn't pretending?" The detective's car sped through the rain-slicked streets toward the place where a little boy, a German shepherd, and an empty stroller waited in the storm. And the secret that connected them all was about to shatter everything these parents thought they knew about their quiet, unusual son. By the time Detective Reynolds' car pulled up to the scene, Noah Hayes was wrapped in a police blanket inside one of the cruisers. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, but thunder still rumbled in the distance. The German shepherd, Max, sat alert outside the car door, refusing to leave the boy's side, even when animal control tried to approach with treats and a leash. Rachel was out of the detective's car before it fully stopped, running toward the cruiser that held her son. David followed close behind, his long legs catching up quickly. An officer stepped aside to let them pass, and Rachel yanked the car door open. "Noah!" she cried, reaching for her son. The boy looked up, his blue eyes unnaturally calm. "Hi, Mommy," he said quietly, as if he'd just returned from a normal day at school. Rachel pulled him into her arms, her body shaking with sobs. "Baby, what happened? How did you get all the way out here?" She ran her hands over his arms and legs, checking for injuries. His feet were scratched and dirty, but otherwise he seemed unhurt. Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past his mother to where Max stood watching them intently. "That's my friend," he said simply. "He needed my help." Rachel turned to look at the dog, noticing for the first time how it stared at her son, not with animal curiosity, but with something deeper, almost human. David knelt beside them. "Noah, whose dog is this? And where did you find the stroller?" "Max doesn't belong to people anymore," Noah replied matter-of-factly. "He belongs to the forest now, and the stroller belongs to the baby who got lost." The adults exchanged concerned glances. Detective Reynolds stepped closer, notepad in hand. "Noah, can you tell us how you got out of your daycare?" Noah tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "The back door was open a little bit. Max was waiting for me by the playground fence." "Wait," Sarah Jensen interjected, having arrived in her own car moments earlier. "That's impossible. The back door has an alarm. It would have sounded if it was opened." "Not if the power went out for a second," Officer Parker noted. "We've had reports of brief outages all over town because of the storm." Detective Reynolds turned back to Noah. "You're saying this dog, Max, was waiting for you at your daycare? How did you know his name?" Noah's expression remained serene, almost eerily so for a child who had just been through such an ordeal. "He told me his name, in my head, like how he told me about the baby." Rachel's arms tightened protectively around her son. "Noah, honey, dogs can't talk." "Max can," Noah insisted, his voice still calm but with a hint of steel that seemed out of place coming from such a small child. "Not with words like people use, but with pictures and feelings. He showed me." David ran a hand through his wet hair, his expression torn between concern and a strange, reluctant fascination. "What did he show you, buddy?" Noah looked directly at Detective Reynolds instead of his father. "He showed me that a long time ago. A baby was in that stroller." He pointed to the abandoned stroller, which had been moved to the side of the road. "And then the baby wasn't there anymore. Max tried to find the baby, but people thought he was bad and chased him away. So he's been looking and looking all by himself." Lucy Morgan, who had remained at the scene despite officers suggesting she could leave, stepped forward. Her medical training made her notice something the others might have missed. The boy wasn't shivering despite being soaked through. His voice hadn't wavered once. Most children his age would be hysterical after such an experience, yet Noah spoke with the measured certainty of someone much older. "Noah," she said gently, crouching down to his level. "I'm Lucy. I'm a nurse. Can you tell me where Max took you today?" Noah studied her face for a moment before deciding she was worthy of an answer. "To the high place where the ground falls away, where the baby was last. He needed me to help, because I'm small enough to get to places he can't anymore. Max is getting old." As if understanding he was being discussed, the German Shepherd padded closer, ignoring the wary looks from the officers. He stopped beside Noah and gently pressed his wet muzzle against the boy's cheek. "The high place?" Detective Reynolds repeated. "Do you mean the cliffs by Hollow Creek?" Noah nodded. "Where the ground is soft and the trees make a circle, where the vines grow like ropes." David's face paled. "Those cliffs are dangerous. There have been landslides there. How did you even know how to get there?" "Max showed me the way," Noah said simply, "and he held my pajamas in his teeth when the ground got slippery." Officer Parker cleared his throat. "Sir, we found muddy paw prints and small footprints heading up toward the North Trail. It leads to an overlook above the creek. It's about a mile into the forest." As they spoke, a young officer approached Detective Reynolds with a plastic evidence bag. "Detective, we found this caught in the stroller wheel. It looks like it's been there a while." Rachel gasped softly as Reynolds held up the bag. Inside was a tattered piece of fabric, once pink, now stained with dirt and age, but clearly part of a baby blanket. A faded embroidered letter L was visible in one corner. "That's part of her blanket," Noah said, his eyes fixed on the bag. "Max remembered the smell. That's why he stays near the road, so he can smell if she comes back." The air seemed to still around them as the implications of Noah's words sank in. Detective Reynolds exchanged a significant look with Officer Parker before turning back to the Hayes family. "I think we need to take this conversation somewhere dry," he said carefully, "and I'd like to have someone from Child Services present when we continue, just as a precaution." Rachel bristled. "Our son hasn't done anything wrong." "No, Mrs. Hayes, he hasn't, but he may have found something very important, and we need to make sure we handle this properly." Lucy stepped forward again. "I can check him over at the hospital if that would help. Make sure he's physically okay." Noah, who had been watching the adults with that unsettling calm, suddenly spoke up. "Max needs to come too. If he stays outside alone again, the bad man might find him." David frowned. "What bad man, Noah?" Noah's expression clouded for the first time. "The man who took the baby, the one who hurt Max when Max tried to stop him. Max has been hiding from him for a long, long time." A heavy silence fell over the group as rain continued to patter against the cruiser roof. Detective Reynolds closed his notebook with a snap. "The dog comes too," he said decisively. "I want to hear everything this boy has to say." As they prepared to leave, Noah wiggled free from his mother's arms and walked over to the stroller. Everyone watched as he placed his small hand on the empty seat, closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "She's been waiting a long time," he said to no one in particular, "but now we can help her. Max says it's time." Behind him, the German Shepherd let out a soft whine that raised goosebumps on every adult present. Whether from the cold rain or from something more unsettling, no one could quite say. Something had been set in motion by this strange meeting of a boy and a dog, something that had begun long before today's storm. As Noah climbed into the back of his parents' car, with Max reluctantly allowed to join him, he looked out the window toward the dark line of trees that marked the edge of Hollow Creek Forest. For just a moment, his eyes seemed older than his 5 years, filled with a knowledge no child should possess. "She's closer now," he whispered to Max, who rested his head on the boy's lap. "I can feel her." David Hayes, climbing into the driver's seat, caught his son's words in the rearview mirror. He exchanged a worried glance with Rachel before starting the engine. "We'll figure this out," Rachel said softly, though whether she was reassuring her husband, her son, or herself wasn't entirely clear. Behind them, the abandoned stroller rocked gently in the wind, its empty seat now a haunting reminder of a mystery that had lain dormant for years, until a boy who could hear things others couldn't followed a dog who had refused to forget. Early the next morning, despite the protests of both his parents, Noah insisted on returning to the forest. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving behind a world washed clean, the morning sun glinting off wet leaves and puddles. Detective Reynolds had asked the Hayes family to come to the station first, where a child psychologist and a representative from Child Services waited. "I need to show you where Max took me," Noah said, his voice quiet but firm as he sat in the station's family room. He hadn't let the German Shepherd out of his sight since their reunion, and now Max lay at his feet, alert and watchful. Dr. Fiona Barnes, the child psychologist, smiled warmly at Noah. "And we'd like to understand what happened yesterday, Noah. But first, could you tell me more about how you met Max?" Noah stroked the dog's head absently. "I didn't meet him yesterday. I've known him for a long time. In my dreams." Rachel and David exchanged worried glances. This was news to them. "In your dreams?" Dr. Barnes prompted gently. Noah nodded. "He's been trying to find me for years. He says I'm the only one who can help because I can hear him, and because I'm small enough." "Small enough for what, honey?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Noah looked up at his mother with those unsettlingly calm eyes. "Small enough to reach the place where the baby fell." The room went silent. Detective Reynolds, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "Noah, are you saying a baby fell somewhere in the forest?" "Not fell," Noah corrected. "Was dropped. The bad man dropped her when Max bit him. That's how Max got hurt." He pointed to a scarred area on the dog's hind leg that none of the adults had noticed before. "The bad man kicked him really hard and took the stroller away, but he didn't get the baby. She was already gone." Dr. Barnes maintained her professional composure, though her pen hovered motionless above her notepad. "And when did this happen, Noah?" Noah shrugged. "A long time ago, before I was born. Max has been waiting for someone who could hear him. He tried lots of kids, but none of them could understand until me." Detective Reynolds looked at Officer Parker, who stood nearby, I think we need to take a look at where this boy went yesterday. Within the hour, a small group had assembled at the trailhead leading into Hollow Creek Forest. Detective Reynolds and Officer Parker led the way, followed by David carrying Noah, with Max trotting alongside them. Rachel walked with Dr. Barnes, while 2 additional officers brought up the rear. They'd left the social worker back at the station, promising to return for a formal interview afterward. This way, Noah pointed, directing them off the main trail onto a barely visible deer path. The ground was still muddy from yesterday's rain, making the going slow. "Are you sure this is safe?" Rachel called from behind, watching her husband carry their son deeper into the trees. "Max says it's okay now," Noah replied. "The bad man doesn't come here anymore. He thinks the baby is gone forever." After 20 minutes of careful hiking, with Max sometimes getting ahead and waiting impatiently for the humans to catch up, they reached a small clearing. Above them, the trees thinned out, revealing a steep rise that led to what the locals called Hollow Point, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the creek far below. "Up there," Noah pointed. Detective Reynolds frowned. "That's pretty steep, son. Are you sure that's where you went yesterday?" Noah nodded. "Max helped me. He pulled me up with his teeth when it got too slippery." Officer Parker shone his flashlight on the muddy slope. "There are fresh tracks here, small footprints and paw prints, just like the boy said." David set Noah down, and immediately the boy took Max's collar. "Show them," he whispered to the dog. As if understanding perfectly, Max began leading Noah up the slope, choosing a path that zigzagged to avoid the steepest parts. The adults followed cautiously, with Officer Parker documenting everything with his body camera. At the top, the forest opened onto a small plateau. One side dropped away sharply to the creek below, a good 50-foot drop onto jagged rocks. The other side was bordered by thick brush and a circle of unusually large pine trees. "This is it," Noah said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The circle of trees, where the ground ate the baby." Detective Reynolds surveyed the area with professional detachment, though his expression betrayed his unease. "What do you mean, the ground ate the baby, Noah?" Instead of answering, Noah walked toward the center of the circle, where a depression in the earth formed a shallow bowl. Max followed closely, sniffing the ground with intense focus. "Here," Noah said, pointing to the depression. The ground was soft from rain, like yesterday. The bad man was holding the baby, but Max jumped up and bit his arm. He demonstrated with a grabbing motion toward his own small arm. The bad man dropped the baby, and she rolled down into this hole. It was bigger then, Max says, full of old water and mud. She disappeared into it. David's face had gone pale. "Noah, honey, this sounds like—" "A sinkhole," Detective Reynolds finished for him. "This whole area is limestone. After heavy rains, sinkholes can form suddenly. They're usually filled with water at first, then drain away underground." Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth. "Are you saying a baby could have fallen into a sinkhole here?" Officer Parker was already examining the depression. "The ground here is different from the surrounding area, looser, and look at this." He held up what appeared to be a length of twisted vine, unusually thick and strong. "It's been cut, with a knife from the looks of it." Noah nodded. "The bad man cut it after he kicked Max. Max tried to pull the baby out with it, but he couldn't reach her. The bad man took the stroller and ran away." Dr. Barnes had been quiet until now, observing Noah's behavior with professional interest. "Noah, how do you know all this if it happened before you were born?" "Max showed me," Noah said simply, "in pictures, in my head, and he showed me where to look." The boy turned to Detective Reynolds. "We need to dig. She's still there." A heavy silence fell over the group. Reynolds looked at Parker, then at the Hayes parents, whose faces showed matching expressions of shock and disbelief. Finally, he made a decision. "Parker, call it in. We need a forensics team up here, and get search and rescue. We'll need equipment if we're going to excavate safely." Rachel gasped. "You're actually going to dig? Based on what a 5-year-old says a dog told him?" Detective Reynolds looked at her evenly. "Mrs. Hayes, in 23 years of police work, I've learned to follow every lead, no matter how unusual. And right now, your son is giving us information that matches with physical evidence. This area has changed since whatever event he's describing, but the description of a sinkhole is consistent with the terrain." David put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Rach, what if he's right? What if there was a baby?" "The Mullen case," Officer Parker said suddenly, looking up from his radio. "Detective, remember the Mullen case? 3 years ago, young couple reported their 6-month-old daughter missing from her stroller. Andrea and James Mullen. They were picnicking near the creek, and the mother left the baby with the father while she went to the car. When she came back, both were gone. The father later turned up at home, claiming the baby had been kidnapped by a stranger while he was setting up their spot. Detective Reynolds' eyes widened in recognition. James Mullen. We questioned him extensively, but without evidence. He said a wild dog attacked him, forced him to drop the baby, Officer Parker continued. But there were inconsistencies in his story, and the mother insisted he was lying about something. Noah, who had been listening to this exchange with unusual attentiveness for a child his age, spoke up. That's not the baby Max is looking for. She's been here much longer. All eyes turned to the boy. Reynolds crouched down to Noah's level. What do you mean, son? How much longer? Noah seemed to consult with Max, looking into the dog's eyes for a long moment. Many, many years. Max was just a puppy. He lived with a family in a yellow house by the big road. One day he followed a man who took a baby from her yard. The man brought her here. My God, Dr. Barnes whispered. He's describing another case entirely. Reynolds stood slowly, his mind racing. We need to look at missing children cases going back. How far, Parker? How old would this dog be? Officer Parker studied Max. German Shepherds live 10 to 13 years on average. This one's older but still healthy. I'd say we're looking at a cold case from at least 10 years ago, possibly longer. Detective Reynolds nodded grimly. Call the station. Tell them to pull every missing child case in a 50-mile radius going back 15 years. Specifically any involving infants under a year old. While the adults were distracted by this revelation, Noah had wandered to the edge of the depression with Max. The boy knelt down and began digging with his small hands, the dog joining him with powerful paws that sent dirt flying. Noah! Rachel cried, rushing forward. Stop that! But before she could reach him, Noah had already pulled something from the loosened earth. He held it up, his expression solemn. It was a small, filthy object, so caked with dirt that it took the adults a moment to recognize it. A baby's sock, tiny, once pink, with a ruffled edge. This was hers, Noah said. There's more down deeper. Max can smell her. Detective Reynolds took the sock carefully, placing it in an evidence bag that Parker handed him. I think we've seen enough, he said quietly. Parker, get that forensics team up here now, and make sure they bring ground-penetrating radar. If there's anything down there... Rachel had gone very still, staring at her son with a mixture of awe and terror. Noah, how did you know where to dig? Noah pointed to Max. He remembered the smell. It's stronger when the ground is wet, like after the storm. That's why he wanted me to come yesterday. The boy looked up at Detective Reynolds. We need to dig more. Max says she's been waiting a long time to go home. Reynolds nodded solemnly. We will, son, but we need special equipment, and we need to do it carefully to protect any evidence. Noah seemed to accept this. He stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. The stroller is important too, he said suddenly. It doesn't belong to the baby in the ground. It belongs to another baby. The one from the couple you were talking about. Parker and Reynolds exchanged shocked glances. You mean the Mullen case? Parker asked. Noah shrugged. I don't know their name, but Max says the same bad man took both babies. He left the stroller on the road yesterday so we would find it, so we would know the babies are connected. The implications of this statement hung heavy in the clearing. If what Noah was saying was true, they weren't looking at one case, but potentially two, separated by years, but connected by the same perpetrator. David stepped forward and picked up his son. I think that's enough for today. Noah needs rest. To everyone's surprise, Noah didn't protest. He simply laid his head on his father's shoulder, suddenly looking every bit the tired 5-year-old he was. Max can stay with the spot, he murmured. He's good at guarding. As if understanding, the German Shepherd sat down firmly at the edge of the depression, his posture alert and protective. Detective Reynolds nodded. We'll have officers here round the clock, and we'll take good care of Max. As they made their way back down the slope, Noah already half asleep in his father's arms, Rachel fell into step beside Dr. Barnes. What's happening to my son? She whispered. How can he know these things? Dr. Barnes watched Noah thoughtfully. There are many things we don't understand about the human mind, Mrs. Hayes, especially children's minds. They're more open in some ways than adults, more receptive. You think he's actually communicating with that dog? I think, Dr. Barnes said carefully, that your son has a genuine gift for empathy and intuition. Whether that extends to actual communication with animals is beyond my expertise to say. But what's clear is that he's connected to something important here, something that might bring closure to a family that's been waiting a very long time. Behind them, at the top of the slope, Max remained motionless, guarding the spot where, if Noah was to be believed, a lost child had been waiting to be found for more than a decade. The news about the stroller in the road and the discovery at Hollow Point spread through Pine Creek like wildfire. By afternoon, the local paper had picked up the story, and by evening, regional news vans had arrived, setting up camp outside the police station, where Detective Reynolds was scheduled to give a press conference. Meanwhile, at the Hayes home, Rachel answered the door to find a woman she didn't recognize, slim, with auburn hair streaked with premature gray, and eyes that held a kind of desperate hope that made Rachel's heart clench. "Mrs. Hayes," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm Andrea Mullen. I believe your son found my daughter's stroller yesterday." Rachel hesitated, remembering Detective Reynolds' warning not to discuss the case with anyone, but the raw pain in Andrea Mullen's eyes made it impossible to turn her away. "Please, come in," she said, stepping aside. They sat in the living room, where Noah was playing quietly with building blocks. Max had been temporarily taken to the veterinarian for a thorough examination and documentation of his old injuries, much to Noah's dismay. But the boy had finally relented when Detective Reynolds promised the dog would return by evening. "Thank you for seeing me," Andrea said, perched on the edge of the sofa as if ready to flee at any moment. "The police wouldn't tell me much, but when I heard a stroller had been found near Hollow Creek, I just knew it was Lily's." Rachel nodded sympathetically. "I understand they confirmed it was yours." "Yes." Andrea's hands twisted in her lap. "It was custom made, with an engraving on the handle. James, my ex-husband, bought it before she was born." Her voice caught. "I've been looking for her for 3 years. The police. They suspected James, but there was never enough evidence. He always claimed a wild dog attacked him, and a stranger took advantage of the chaos to grab Lily." Noah, who had been quietly arranging his blocks in a circle that resembled the formation of trees at Hollow Point, looked up suddenly. "It wasn't a wild dog," he said clearly. "It was Max, and there was no stranger, just the bad man." Andrea's head snapped toward Noah, her eyes widening. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Rachel started to intervene. "Noah, honey, maybe you shouldn't..." But Noah continued, his gaze fixed on Andrea with that same eerie calm he'd shown at the clearing. "And Max bit the bad man because he was hurting the baby. The bad man kicked Max really hard and threw the baby. Then he took the stroller and ran away." Andrea's face had gone completely white. "How could you possibly know?" "The German Shepherd," she whispered, a terrible recognition dawning in her eyes. "James came home with a bite on his arm. He said it was from a wild dog, but it was a clean bite, not a ragged one. The police said it looked more like a domestic dog attack." She stared at Noah. "And his leg was bruised. He said he fell running away from the dog, but..." "He was lying," Noah said simply. "Max knows." Andrea's breathing had become rapid, her hands shaking visibly now. "James always insisted the stroller was taken too, but the police thought that was suspicious. Why would a kidnapper bother with a bulky stroller when they found no trace of it anywhere?" She turned to Rachel, her eyes swimming with tears. "And now it turns up 3 years later, in the middle of a road, guarded by a German Shepherd?" Rachel wasn't sure what to say. The implications were too horrible to voice aloud in front of Noah, but Noah had no such reservations. The bad man kept the stroller in his secret place. Max found it and brought it to the road so people would know the truth, so they would look for the babies. "Babies!" Andrea's voice cracked on the word. "What do you mean, babies?" Before Noah could answer, there was a knock at the door. Rachel excused herself and went to answer it, grateful for the interruption. Detective Reynolds stood on the porch, his expression grave. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need to speak with Noah again. We've found something at the clearing, and..." He stopped short, looking past Rachel to where Andrea Mullen now stood in the hallway, her face tear-streaked. "Mrs. Mullen," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here?" "Is it true?" Andrea demanded, stepping forward. "Did you find something at Hollow Creek? Something connected to Lily?" Reynolds's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine compassion. "Mrs. Mullen, We're investigating several possibilities. I can't comment on ongoing—" "Please," Andrea's voice broke. "It's been 3 years. I need to know." Reynolds hesitated, then nodded slightly. "We've found evidence that may be connected to your daughter's case, and potentially to another, older case as well. That's why I need to speak with Noah again." "The pink sock," Noah said from behind them, where he had silently appeared in the hallway, "and the blanket piece with the L. Those belong to the baby in the ground, not Lily." Andrea gasped softly, and Reynolds turned to Noah with renewed intensity. "Noah, the forensics team used ground-penetrating radar at the site you showed us. They found an anomaly, something buried about 4 feet down. We're beginning careful excavation, but I need to know, how sure are you about what's down there?" Noah looked at the detective with those unsettlingly old eyes in his young face. "She's been there a long time, longer than Lily has been gone. Max has been trying to tell people for years, but no one could hear him." Reynolds nodded slowly. "We've been looking through cold cases. There's one from 12 years ago that might match. A 9-month-old baby girl named Laura Emerson disappeared from her front yard in Pine Creek. The mother had left her in her stroller for just a few minutes while she answered the phone. When she came back, both the baby and the stroller were gone." "Laura," Noah repeated, testing the name. "The sock and the blanket piece both have L on them." Andrea's knees seemed to buckle, and Rachel quickly guided her to a chair. "You're saying the same person who took my Lily also took this baby 12 years ago? And what? Buried her at Hollow Point?" Reynolds looked uncomfortable, clearly regretting having this conversation in front of both Noah and Andrea. "We don't know anything for certain yet, Mrs. Mullen. We're still in the early stages of investigation." But Noah wasn't finished. "The bad man took both babies to the same place, but Max stopped him from hurting Lily the same way. He bit the bad man and made him drop her." A terrible silence fell over the group as the adults processed what Noah was saying. If he was right, if this was indeed what had happened, then the implications for Lily Mullen were devastating. "This bad man," Reynolds said carefully, crouching down to Noah's level. "You've never seen him, have you, Noah? You only know what Max has shown you?" Noah nodded. "But I know what he looks like now. Max remembers. He has yellow hair and a mark on his neck, like a smudge, and he smells like the stuff Dad puts on the car to make it shiny." Reynolds' eyebrows shot up. "Car wax?" Noah nodded again. "Max remembers the smell. It was on the bad man's hands when he took Laura, and it was on him when he took Lily, too." Andrea had gone very still. "James works at a body shop," she whispered. "He always smelled like car products when he came home." Reynolds straightened up, a new urgency in his movements. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to take Noah to the station again. With your permission, of course. We have a sketch artist I'd like him to work with." "Is that really necessary?" Rachel asked, protectively moving closer to her son. "He's already been through so much." "Mom," Noah said, his voice oddly mature for his small frame, "it's okay. Max wants me to help. He says it's important to find the bad man before he hurts more babies." Rachel looked from her son to the detective, then to Andrea Mullen, whose eyes pleaded silently for anything that might lead to answers about her daughter. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but I'm coming too, and I want Max brought there as soon as the vet is finished with him."
Reynolds agreed readily. "Of course. And Mrs. Mullen, I think you should come to the station as well. We may have new questions about your ex-husband."
As they prepared to leave, Noah tugged on Andrea's sleeve. When she looked down, the boy's eyes were filled with a compassion far beyond his years. "Max tried really hard to save Lily," he said softly. "He didn't want her to disappear like Laura did. That's why he's been waiting by the road all this time, waiting for someone who could understand him." Andrea knelt down, her eyes level with Noah's. "And that someone was you," she whispered. Noah nodded solemnly. "Max says sometimes kids can hear things grown-ups can't, because we still remember how to listen properly." As Rachel gathered Noah's jacket and prepared to follow Detective Reynolds to the station, she wondered what other things her extraordinary son might be able to hear, and what other long-buried secrets might soon come to light because of a boy who believed a dog could speak to him, and a German shepherd who had never forgotten the babies he couldn't save. Max was waiting for them at the police station, freshly bathed and sporting a bandage on his leg where the vet had taken tissue samples from his old scars. The moment Noah walked through the door, the German shepherd bounded toward him, tail wagging with unrestrained joy. "Max!" Noah dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog's thick neck. "Did they hurt you?" "Just routine examination," said Dr. Wilson, the veterinarian who had accompanied Max back to the station. "He's surprisingly healthy for a dog his age. Based on his teeth and joints, I'd estimate he's around 11 or 12 years old. The scarring on his hind leg is consistent with blunt force trauma that occurred many years ago. Someone kicked him, hard." Detective Reynolds nodded grimly, exactly as Noah described. Dr. Wilson crouched down beside Noah and Max. "There's something else you should know. We found a microchip." A ripple of surprise went through the group, gathered in the station's conference room. Reynolds, Parker, Rachel, David, Andrea, Mullen, and Dr. Barnes, who had been asked to observe Noah's interactions with the dog. "A chip?" Reynolds asked. "Was it registered?" "It was," Dr. Wilson confirmed, handing him a printout. "To a family named Calloway. They reported him missing 12 years ago, right around the same time as the Laura Emerson kidnapping. They assumed he'd run away or been stolen." Reynolds studied the paper. "Coincidence?" "Wait," Andrea interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. "Calloway? As in Richard Calloway, the retired police officer?" Reynolds' head snapped up. "You know him?" "He was the first responder when I reported Lily missing," Andrea said, her eyes wide with shock. "He was the one who questioned James initially, before the investigation was turned over to you. I remember because he was particularly sympathetic. Said he knew what it was like to lose something precious." Noah, who had been silently petting Max, spoke up. "Max remembers Officer Calloway. He was kind. He tried to help Max find the baby, but he didn't understand what Max was telling him." Rachel exchanged an uneasy glance with David. Their son's seemingly preternatural knowledge was becoming harder to dismiss as imagination. Reynolds turned to Officer Parker. "Get Calloway on the phone. I want him down here, now." While they waited, a forensic artist worked with Noah in a separate room. Using Max as a reference point, Noah described the bad man in surprising detail. Blonde hair cut very short, a birthmark or tattoo on the left side of his neck, shaped like a smudged star, hands that smelled of car wax, and eyes, the color of the sky when it's about to storm. When Noah finished, the artist turned her sketch pad around. The face that stared back at them was so specific, so devoid of the usual childish estimations, that even Dr. Barnes seemed taken aback. "That's remarkably detailed for a child who claims to have only seen this person through a dog's memories," she murmured to Reynolds. "Mom," Noah called, running over to Rachel after the session ended, "Max wants to show me something else, something about the bad man's secret place." "Noah, honey, I think you've done enough for today," Rachel said, stroking his hair. "You must be tired." "But it's important," Noah insisted, his eyes wide and urgent. "Max says the bad man keeps special things from the babies he takes, to remember them by. Like how I keep pretty rocks from places we visit." Reynolds, who had been consulting with Parker nearby, overheard this exchange. "Trophies," he said grimly. "Serial offenders often keep trophies from their victims." "We should let Noah rest," Dr. Barnes suggested. "He's had a very intense day." But before anyone could respond, the station door opened and a man in his 60s entered, tall, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement. Richard Calloway. Max's reaction was immediate and startling. The dog, who had been calmly sitting beside Noah, leapt to his feet and bounded across the room, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook. The scene that followed brought tears to every eye in the room, Max whimpering with joy, pressing against his long-lost owner, while Calloway knelt on the floor, his weathered face awash with disbelief and happiness. "Max? My God, it really is you," Calloway whispered, his hands trembling as they ran over the dog's familiar form. "Where have you been, old friend?" Noah watched this reunion with his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. After a moment, he walked over and placed his small hand on Calloway's shoulder. "Max says he's sorry he couldn't find Laura in time," the boy said softly. "He tried to tell you, but you couldn't understand him." Calloway's head snapped up, his eyes widening as they locked with Noah's. "What did you say?" "Laura," Noah repeated. "The baby who disappeared. Max tried to follow her smell, but no one would listen to him. So he kept going back to the place where she fell into the ground, hoping someone would follow him there." The retired officer's face drained of color. "How do you know about Laura Emerson? That was 12 years ago, before you were born." Max told me, Noah said simply. He remembers everything. Calloway looked from Noah to Reynolds, shock written across his features. What is this? Some kind of sick joke? Sir, Reynolds said carefully, we have reason to believe that the dog, your dog, Max, has been trying to lead people to evidence connected to the Laura Emerson kidnapping for years. Yesterday, he finally succeeded when he led Noah Hayes to a location at Hollow Creek, where we've found physical evidence that may be connected to the case. What kind of evidence? Calloway demanded, his arm still wrapped protectively around Max. A child's sock, a piece of blanket with the letter L embroidered on it, and what appears to be, Reynolds hesitated, glancing at Noah, a burial site. We're excavating now, with the proper care and forensic protocols. Calloway's breathing had become shallow, his eyes haunted. All this time, he whispered, all this time, he was trying to tell us. There's more, Reynolds continued. We believe there may be a connection between the Emerson case and a more recent kidnapping, the Lily Mullen case from 3 years ago. At this, Calloway's expression changed subtly. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition or perhaps alarm. It was gone so quickly that Reynolds might have missed it if he hadn't been watching carefully. The Mullen case, Calloway said, his voice carefully neutral, that was after my time. I only took the initial report. Yes, we know, Reynolds replied. Mrs. Mullen mentioned you were particularly sympathetic. Calloway nodded stiffly. Any officer would be, in a case involving a child. Noah, who had been watching this exchange with unusual intensity, suddenly spoke again. Max says you know the bad man's voice. You've heard it many times. On your radio. The room went very still. Calloway stared at Noah, his face unreadable. What do you mean, son? Instead of answering, Noah turned to Detective Reynolds. Can I see the picture of the bad man now? The one the lady drew? Reynolds hesitated, then nodded to Parker, who brought over the sketch. Noah took it and held it up for Calloway to see. Do you know him? Noah asked. Max thinks you might. Calloway took the sketch with trembling hands. For a long moment, he stared at it in silence. Then he looked up, his expression grim. This is Tim Weaver. He works at Eastside Auto Body. He used to be a dispatcher for the department before my time. And he's my nephew, my sister's boy. A collective gasp went through the room. Andrea Mullen pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Your nephew? Reynolds repeated, his voice carefully controlled. And did you know he was connected to James Mullen? Calloway's head snapped up. Connected how? They work at the same body shop, Andrea said, her voice barely above a whisper. James got Tim the job there after he was fired from his previous position. They're friends. They go fishing together. Reynolds was already signaling to Parker. Get units to Weaver's residence and workplace immediately, and put out an APB on James Mullen. I want them both brought in for questioning. Wait, Calloway protested, rising to his feet. You can't seriously believe Tim is involved in this? Based on what? A child's imagination and a dog's supposed testimony? And physical evidence, Reynolds countered, and the fact that your nephew has direct connections to both cases. That's more than enough for questioning. Noah, still standing beside Calloway, looked up at the retired officer with those unsettlingly old eyes. Max says sometimes the people closest to us have the darkest secrets. That's why he ran away that day, because he could smell Laura on Tim's hands. Calloway's face paled further. That's impossible. Tim was at our house for a barbecue the day before Laura disappeared. He was playing with Max. And the day after? Reynolds asked quietly. Calloway faltered. I don't remember. It was 12 years ago. Max remembers, Noah said softly. He bit Tim when Tim tried to take Laura away in her stroller. That's why Tim kicked him. That's why Max ran away from home. He was following Laura's scent. The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air. If Noah, or rather Max, was right, then Calloway's own nephew was responsible for Laura Emerson's disappearance, and possibly Lily Mullen's as well. Calloway sank back into his chair, his face ashen. This can't be happening, he murmured. Not Tim. He's family. Sir, Reynolds said, more gently now, we're going to need a statement from you about your nephew's activities around the time of both disappearances, and we'll need DNA samples to compare with what we're finding at the Hollow Creek site. Calloway nodded numbly, his hand still absently stroking Max's fur. "Of course, whatever you need." While Reynolds continued speaking with Calloway, Rachel drew Noah aside. "Honey, how are you feeling? This is a lot for someone your age to handle." Noah looked up at his mother, his expression serious but calm. "I'm okay, Mom. Max is the one who's been carrying this for a long time. He's been very brave." "And so have you," Rachel said, kneeling to hug him. "Most grown-ups wouldn't believe what Max was telling them, but you did." Noah hugged her back. "That's because I know how to listen properly. Lots of kids do, but they forget how when they get older." Over Noah's shoulder, Rachel caught David's eye. Her husband's expression mirrored her own, a mixture of pride, wonder, and lingering disbelief at the extraordinary situation they found themselves in. Across the room, Dr. Barnes was deep in conversation with Detective Reynolds. "I've never seen anything quite like this," she admitted. "Noah's descriptions are too specific, too consistent to dismiss as imagination. And the dog's behavior?" "I know," Reynolds agreed. "I've worked with K9 units for years. Dogs can be trained to find evidence, to track scents, but this level of apparent communication, this persistence over years, it's unprecedented." Dr. Barnes watched as Noah went back to sit beside Max, the boy's small hand resting on the dog's head with a familiarity that seemed to go beyond their short acquaintance. "There are documented cases of children with extraordinary empathic abilities," she said thoughtfully, "and animals often perceive things we don't. Changes in behavior, emotional states, even medical conditions before they're clinically detectable. Is it so far-fetched to think that a particularly sensitive child might be able to interpret a dog's memories and intentions?" Before Reynolds could answer, Officer Parker burst back into the room, his expression urgent. "We've got a problem. Tim Weaver didn't show up for work today. His apartment's empty, looks like he packed in a hurry, and James Mullen is also missing." Andrea gasped. "Missing? What do you mean missing?" "His roommate says he left early this morning, took a bag with him, said something about a fishing trip." Noah stood up suddenly, his small body tense. "The lake house," he said clearly. "That's where they're going, where they took Lily." All eyes turned to the boy. Reynolds approached slowly. "What lake house, Noah?" "Max remembers Tim talking about it. A house by the water where no one would bother them, where the bad man keeps his special things from the babies." Reynolds turned to Calloway. "Does your nephew have a lake house?" The retired officer shook his head. "Not that I know of, but my sister, his mother, had a cabin on Lake Sutter. Tim used to go there as a kid. After she died, it sat empty for years. I don't even know if he kept it." "Lake Sutter," Reynolds repeated, already reaching for his radio. "Parker, get the address of that cabin and call for backup. If Weaver and Mullen are there—" Noah interrupted, his voice suddenly urgent. "We need to hurry. Max says the bad man will try to run away again, like he did with Laura and Lily." Reynolds hesitated, looking at the boy's serious face, then at Max, who had risen to his feet, his posture alert and ready. A decision formed in his mind, one that went against protocol, against his better judgment, and yet somehow felt right. "Mrs. Hayes," he said to Rachel, "I need to ask something unusual. Would you allow Noah to accompany us to this location? At a safe distance, of course. If Max really does have some connection to these events, he might help us locate evidence. And Noah seems to be the only one who can interpret his signals." Rachel's immediate instinct was to refuse, to protect her son from any further involvement in this dark, confusing case. But before she could speak, Noah looked up at her with those eyes that seemed too old for his face. "I need to go, Mom," he said quietly. "Max has been waiting a long time to finish this, to make it right, and he needs me to help." David put his hand on Rachel's shoulder. "We'll both go," he said. "We won't let Noah out of our sight." Rachel looked from her husband to her son, then to Max, who was watching her, with an intelligence that was impossible to dismiss. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said, "but Noah stays in the car, with us, at all times. He does not approach the cabin or any potential crime scene. Is that clear?" Reynolds nodded gratefully. "Absolutely clear, Mrs. Hayes. Your son's safety is our priority." As they prepared to leave, Calloway approached Noah one last time. The retired officer knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level. "Noah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "if what you're saying is true, if my nephew really did these terrible things, then I owe you and Max more than I can ever repay. You've done what I couldn't do for 12 years. Follow the trail to the truth. Noah studied Calloway's face with that same unsettling directness. Max says it's not your fault, he said finally. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones we see the least clearly. Calloway's eyes filled with tears. He placed a gentle hand on Max's head, then stood and turned to Reynolds. I'm coming too, he said firmly. If Tim is involved in this, I need to see it with my own eyes. Reynolds nodded his understanding. Sometimes, the hardest truths were the ones we had to witness for ourselves. As they filed out of the station toward the waiting vehicles, Noah held tightly to Max's collar. The German Shepherd moved with renewed purpose, as if he understood that his long vigil, his years of waiting for someone who could hear him, was finally coming to an end. It's going to be okay, Noah whispered to him. We're going to find Lily, and we're going to make sure Laura is never forgotten. I promise. Max looked up at the boy, and for a moment, it was almost possible to believe that the dog understood every word, that the bond between them transcended the normal boundaries of human and animal communication, that sometimes the purest souls among us are the ones who can hear what others cannot, the silent cries of those who need us most. Lake Sutter lay nestled among rolling hills about 40 miles outside of Pine Creek, its waters dark and still in the fading afternoon light. The convoy of police vehicles approached slowly, lights off, radios silent. At the lead, Detective Reynolds drove with Officer Parker beside him. In the back seat, Richard Calloway sat rigidly, his expression grim. In the second car, David and Rachel Hayes flanked their son, with Max sitting at Noah's feet. The German Shepherd's posture was alert, his ears pricked forward as if already sensing something in the air. It's just up ahead, Reynolds' voice crackled through the radio. A quarter mile, then we turn off onto a private road. We'll stop there and assess. The cars pulled over at the turnoff, hidden from view of the main cabin by a stand of tall pines. Reynolds approached the Hayes vehicle. We've confirmed 2 vehicles at the property, Weaver's pickup and a sedan registered to James Mullen. We need to move carefully. If they're holding Lily... Noah pressed his face to the window. She's there, he said with quiet certainty. Max can feel it. She's scared, but she's alive. Reynolds glanced at Rachel and David. We're going to secure the perimeter, then approach. You stay here until we give the all clear. Understood? They nodded, and Reynolds returned to the lead car. A moment later, the officers began to move silently through the trees toward the cabin, weapons drawn. In the car, Noah fidgeted anxiously. Max needs to go with them, he said suddenly. He knows where to look. Noah, Detective Reynolds said we need to stay here, Rachel reminded him gently. But Max was already pawing at the door, whining softly. Noah looked at his parents, his eyes pleading. Please, Max has been waiting 12 years for this moment. He needs to help find Lily. David and Rachel exchanged worried glances. Honey, it's not safe, David began. I'll stay in the car, Noah promised. But Max needs to go. He can smell her. After a moment of hesitation, David cracked the car door. Max, stay with the officers, he instructed, as if the dog could understand his words. Perhaps he could, because the moment the door opened wide enough, Max slipped out and bounded silently after the retreating forms of Reynolds and his team. Be careful, Noah whispered after him. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. From their position, they could see little of what was happening at the cabin. Occasionally, they caught glimpses of officers moving into position around the perimeter. Then, suddenly, a flurry of activity, shouting, a door being broken down, more shouting.
And then, a sound that made every hair on Noah's arm stand up. A child's scream. Lily, he whispered.
What happened next would later be pieced together from officer statements, evidence collected from the scene, and, yes, Noah's uncanny insights about what Max had witnessed. Tim Weaver and James Mullen had indeed been at the cabin, preparing to flee the country with forged passports found in their possession. They had been partners in more ways than one. James had helped cover for Tim's crimes, and in return, Tim had allowed James access to the children he took. It was a darkness too terrible for most minds to comprehend. And, most importantly, Lily Mullen was there, alive, though traumatized from 3 years of captivity. She had been kept in a hidden room beneath the cabin, accessed through a trapdoor concealed under a rug. A room filled with trophies from other victims, small shoes, pieces of clothing, blankets, items that linked Tim Weaver to at least 4 child disappearances spanning 15 years. When the police burst in, Weaver had tried to escape through a back window. That was when Max, following his own instincts rather than police protocol, had intercepted him, launching himself at the man who had kicked him 12 years ago, bringing him down with a precision that belied his age. As officers handcuffed Weaver, Max had turned his attention to the cabin floor, scratching frantically at the concealed trapdoor, barking with an urgency that could not be ignored. When officers lifted the door, they found Lily, pale, thin, but alive, and behind her, shelves of nightmarish mementos, including a baby blanket with the name Laura fully embroidered across its corner. Back in the car, Noah sat up suddenly. "They found her," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Max found Lily. She's coming out now." Rachel and David, who had seen and heard nothing from their vantage point, exchanged doubtful glances, until, moments later, they watched as an officer emerged from the cabin, carrying a small, blanket-wrapped figure. Behind them came Max, trotting proudly as if leading a procession. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, tears filling her eyes. "He was right." Andrea Mullen, who had remained at the station under the care of a victim advocate, would soon be reunited with the daughter she had thought lost forever. James Mullen and Tim Weaver would never again see freedom, their crimes too numerous and horrific for any possibility of parole. And at Hollow Creek, the careful excavation would continue, eventually revealing the remains of Laura Emerson, laid to rest after 12 long years of waiting to be found. The evidence collected from the cabin would provide the final links needed to bring closure to her family as well. As Max trotted back to the car, his mission finally complete, Noah opened the door and threw his arms around the dog's neck. "You did it," he whispered into the soft fur. "You found them both. You finished what you started 12 years ago." Max licked Noah's cheek, his brown eyes seeming to hold a wisdom and relief that transcended simple animal emotion. For a moment, it was easy to believe that he understood exactly what Noah was saying, that the strange bond between them had made possible what years of conventional investigation could not. "Noah," David said softly, watching his son with the dog, "how did you know? How could you possibly have known all these things?" Noah looked up at his father, his expression serene. "I told you, Dad. Max told me. I just knew how to listen." As police lights flashed across the darkening landscape, and officers secured the scene of one of Pine Creek's longest-standing mysteries, a boy and a dog sat together in peaceful communion. Two souls who had, against all odds, found a way to bridge the silence between species to right a wrong that had haunted them both, though in very different ways. And somewhere, in whatever place holds the spirits of those who leave this world too soon, little Laura Emerson could finally rest in peace, knowing that the loyal guardian who had tried to save her had, in the end, brought her justice, with the help of a boy who could hear what others could not. 6 months later, Noah Hayes sat on the front porch of their house, his homework spread across the wooden steps. Beside him, Max dozed in the afternoon sun, occasionally opening one eye to check on his young companion. The German Shepherd had officially become part of the Hayes family after Richard Calloway, devastated by his nephew's crimes, had asked if they would care for Max permanently. "He belongs with Noah," Calloway had said, his voice thick with emotion. "They understand each other in a way I never could." The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Max suffered from nightmares, just as humans do, often waking in the middle of the night, whimpering and searching for Noah. But slowly, with patience and love, the dog was learning to be a pet again, rather than a guardian carrying an impossible burden. Noah had changed too. His parents had noticed how he would sometimes pause in the middle of conversations, his head tilted as if listening to something they couldn't hear. When they asked about it, he would simply say, "Max is telling me something," and that had become normal in their household. "Noah, honey, come inside," Rachel called from the doorway. "There's someone here to see you." Noah looked up from his math homework to see Andrea Mullen walking up their front path, holding the hand of a little girl with curly brown hair and bright blue eyes. Lily was 6 now, having spent her 4th, 5th, and 6th birthdays in captivity. But with intensive therapy and her mother's unwavering love, she was slowly becoming the child she was meant to be. "Hi, Mrs. Mullen," Noah said, standing up politely. "Hi, Lily." Lily hung back shyly behind her mother, but her eyes were fixed on Max, who had lifted his head at their approach. Lily wanted to meet Max properly, Andrea explained, her voice still sometimes catching when she spoke of the dog who had saved her daughter. "She's been asking about him every day since we got back from our vacation." Noah smiled and patted Max's head. "He'd like to meet you too, Lily. He remembers you from when you were really little. Lily took a tentative step forward. Does he really talk to you? Not with words like people use, Noah explained patiently, but yes, he talks to me. He uses pictures and feelings, like how you might draw something instead of writing it down. Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Children, Noah had learned, were much more accepting of things that adults found impossible to believe. What is he saying now? Lily asked, taking another step closer. Noah placed his hand on Max's head and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there were tears there. He says he's sorry he couldn't save you sooner. He says he tried very hard, but it took him a long time to find someone who could understand him. Lily's eyes filled with tears too, but she continued forward until she was standing right in front of Max. "It's okay," she whispered, placing her small hand on his muzzle. "You did save me. You brought Noah to find me." Max's tail wagged slowly, and he gently licked Lily's hand. For a moment, watching them together, Andrea could almost believe that the dog truly understood every word. "Lily has something for Max," Andrea said, wiping away her own tears. "We made it together." Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, hand-woven collar. It was purple and gold, with a small silver tag that read, "Max, Hero and Guardian Angel." "Purple is my favorite color," Lily explained, as Noah helped her put the collar on Max. "And gold is for brave people, like you." Max sat perfectly still as they fastened the collar, his eyes moving between Lily and Noah with what could only be described as contentment. As they were admiring Max's new collar, another car pulled into the driveway. Noah looked up to see Detective Reynolds getting out, accompanied by a woman Noah didn't recognize. "Detective Reynolds!" Noah called, waving. "Come meet Lily." Reynolds approached with a smile, but there was something serious in his expression. "Hello, Noah, Mrs. Mullen, Lily." He nodded to each of them in turn. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Chen. She's a researcher from the university who's been studying animal behavior and communication." Dr. Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, knelt down to Noah's level. "Hello, Noah. I've heard some very interesting things about you and Max. I wonder if you'd be willing to help me with some research." Noah looked at his parents, who had come out onto the porch, then back at Dr. Chen. "What kind of research?" "I study how animals and humans communicate," she explained. "There are many cases throughout history of people who seem to have special connections with animals. I'd like to document your experiences with Max, if you're comfortable with that." Noah considered this. "Will it help other kids understand their pets better?" "It might," Dr. Chen said, "and it might help us understand how to solve crimes using animals' knowledge and instincts." "We'd be honored to help," Rachel said, speaking for the family. "Noah's gift has already changed so many lives." Detective Reynolds cleared his throat. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here. We've had 3 more cases in the region where animals have been trying to lead people to evidence. Dogs mostly, but also a cat. And, believe it or not, a horse. We think there might be more children and families out there who could benefit from Noah's abilities." Noah's eyes widened. "There are other animals like Max who need help?" "We think so," Reynolds confirmed. "If you're willing, and if your parents agree, we'd like to work with you on a consulting basis. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would interfere with school or your normal life. But when we have cases where animals seem to be trying to communicate something important..." "Yes," Noah said immediately. "Yes, I want to help them." Max, who had been listening to this conversation with unusual attention, suddenly stood up and walked over to Dr. Chen. He sat down directly in front of her and stared into her eyes with an intensity that made her take a step back. "What's he doing?" she asked Noah. Noah tilted his head, listening. "He's telling you something about your daughter." Dr. Chen's face went white. "My daughter? How could he possibly know about my daughter?" "She's not lost," Noah said gently. "But she's been very sad. Max says she has a pet rabbit who has been trying to tell her something important, about where her grandmother hid something before she died." Dr. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. "Patches," she whispered. "My daughter's rabbit, Patches. Ever since my mother died last year, Emma has been insisting that Patches is trying to show her something in my mother's garden. We thought she was just grieving, trying to find ways to feel close to her grandmother. Patches knows where your mother buried something special for Emma," Noah continued. his voice taking on that strange, mature quality it had when he was interpreting Max's communications. She did it the day before she went to the hospital. She wanted Emma to find it when she was older, but she never got the chance to tell her. Dr. Chen sat down heavily on the porch steps. This is impossible, but my mother did love to bury little treasures for Emma to find. Time capsules, she called them. Max says you should let Emma follow Patches tomorrow morning, when the sun is bright. In the corner of the garden where the roses grow, there's a metal box buried there with Emma's name on it. Dr. Chen looked from Noah to Max, then back again. If this is true, she began. It is, Noah said simply. Max can feel it. Animals remember things differently than people do. They remember with their whole bodies, not just their minds. And sometimes, they remember things that happen near them, even if they weren't there to see it. As if to emphasize Noah's point, Max walked over to the corner of the Hayes' front yard and began digging in a specific spot. Within moments, he had unearthed a small metal toy car, rusted but still recognizable. That's impossible, David said, staring at the toy. We've lived here for 3 years. How could he know there was something buried there? Noah walked over and picked up the toy car. It belonged to the little boy who lived here before us. Max says he buried it there the day before his family moved away. He was going to come back for it, but he never did. Rachel and David exchanged amazed glances. They had indeed purchased the house from a family with a young son, but they'd never met the child or heard this story. We should return it to him, Noah said matter-of-factly. Max says he's grown up now, but he still thinks about this car sometimes. Dr. Chen stood up slowly, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Noah, would you and Max be willing to work with me on a long-term study? I think what you're doing could revolutionize how we understand animal cognition and communication. As long as it helps people and animals, Noah agreed, and as long as Max wants to do it. Max, as if understanding the question, walked back to Noah and sat beside him, resting his head against the boy's leg with a contentment that spoke volumes. Detective Reynolds smiled. I think we have our answer. Noah, you and Max have already helped solve cases that had been cold for years. I have a feeling this is just the beginning. As the afternoon wore on, more visitors arrived. Richard Calloway came by with a special dog treat he'd made for Max, his way of maintaining a connection with the pet he'd given up for Noah's sake. The Emerson family, Laura's parents, stopped by to thank Noah once again for giving them the closure they'd needed for 12 years. And as the sun began to set, Noah found himself surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by his unusual gift, the ability to hear what animals had been trying to tell humans all along. It's not just me, Noah said as they all gathered on the porch, watching Max play with Lily in the front yard. Lots of kids can do this. We just forget how to listen as we get older. But maybe, if we try harder, we can remember. Dr. Chen, who had spent the afternoon taking notes and asking questions, looked up from her notebook. You really believe other children have this ability? Noah nodded. Max says there are lots of animals out there waiting for someone to hear them. Dogs who know where missing people are, cats who can sense when someone is sick, horses who remember things their owners need to know. We just have to learn how to listen properly. As if summoned by Noah's words, a small tabby cat appeared at the edge of the yard. It sat down and began meowing repeatedly, its eyes fixed on Dr. Chen. That's Mrs. Patterson's cat from down the street, Rachel said. Oliver. He's usually very shy around strangers. Noah walked over to the cat and knelt down. After a moment, he looked up at Dr. Chen with surprise. He knows you, he said. He says you helped save his brother 3 years ago, at the animal hospital where you used to work. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. I did volunteer at an animal hospital during graduate school, but how could this cat possibly know that? Animals remember kindness, Noah said simply. They remember the people who help them, even if they only meet them once. Oliver says his brother is healthy now, living with a family with 2 little girls. He wanted you to know that your kindness mattered. As the evening deepened and their visitors began to leave, Noah sat on the porch steps with Max, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Rachel and David sat nearby, still amazed by the events of the past 6 months. Noah, David said gently, do you ever wish you were just a normal kid, without this gift? Noah considered the question seriously. Sometimes it's hard, he admitted. When Max shows me sad things, or when other animals are in pain. But mostly, I'm glad I can help. Max carried that sadness about Laura for so many years. Now he's happy. And Lily is safe. And Laura's family knows what happened to her. He paused, stroking Max's fur. I think maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Help people and animals understand each other better. Rachel reached over and squeezed her son's hand. Whatever happens, we're proud of you. You've done something amazing. As they prepared to go inside, Noah noticed something that made him smile. In the yard, fireflies were beginning to dance in the warm air, and Max was watching them with the simple joy of a dog who no longer carried the weight of unsolved mysteries. Max says the fireflies are celebrating, Noah said softly. They're happy that the sad story finally has a happy ending. David and Rachel exchanged a look over their son's head. Whether or not animals could truly communicate with humans, whether or not Noah's gift was real in the way adults understood reality, one thing was undeniable. Their son had brought peace to a dog who had waited 12 years for justice, reunited a mother with her lost daughter, and given closure to families who had been searching for answers. And perhaps, in the end, that was the only reality that truly mattered. The story that began with a German shepherd guarding an empty stroller had become something much larger. A tale of loyalty, love, and the unbreakable bonds between those who protect and those who need protection. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important truths come not from what we can see or prove, but from what we're willing to hear when we open our hearts to listen. As Noah Hayes tucked himself into bed that night, with Max curled up on the floor beside him, he whispered a quiet thank you to the dog who had chosen him, trusted him, and taught him that the language of love transcends all barriers, even the ones between species. And if you've been moved by this incredible story of Noah and Max, please take a moment to like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Stories like this remind us that miracles can happen when we believe in the impossible, and that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that speak without words. The bond between Noah and Max continues to this day, with both of them working alongside Dr. Chen and Detective Reynolds to help solve cases and reunite families. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is simply learning how to listen, really listen, to those who need us most. And sometimes, just sometimes, those who need us most are the ones who have been trying to tell us their secrets all along.